closing Gisborne yesterday, and I can assure you the roaring form, whoever it is, got a massive beard. It's that I understand you get a bit on your side.
Good way.
I've got a war on roads. After an hour.
Oh, cool. That's
It was blowing up with this. But load of sand, truckload of sand, truckload of line trip, and let the grass grow for it, look, my another lawn is finished.
We're on here.
Not a big deal.
I'll raise the sorry, we'll get back to
It's 20 years ago.
Anyway, I think I need to make soon we get ourselves going. The meeting is 9 o'clock. Thank you for your attendance. Terry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. It's breaking up a little bit every now and again, but I'm picking up most of it.
That's great. Well, it's good to have you here. And probably it would be wise to start with apologies. Gary's not here.
Yeah, he puts his apologies in. Thank you.
Okay, is anybody else? Otherwise, we've got a muster. I've got a move from the chair that we sustain Gary's apology. Do I have something? Thank you, Sally. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Gary, thank you very much. I haven't been informed of anybody seeking to speak to us in public forum. And items on the agenda, it's not this now, but I just wanted to note that there was a second late item which I think is quite appropriate to have at this stage, which was that we've got a report on the consultation document, which we will include in the open session. Do we have Carl here today all the way? Oh, Carl's there. Carl, sorry. Get your head down. I hope you'll be comfortable to share your thoughts on that when we get to it later in the morning. Right, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome to come and sit up at the table here tonight.
As long as I'm not a certified council there.
Your land will follow.
Carl, I don't consider you council does it. I'll bring my name to you. Thank you for being here, Carl. Thank you. Excellent. In terms of the agenda in front of us, are there any matters that people need to declare at this stage? Great. Can we move then to the confirmation of the minutes, please? Get my agenda, they are the minutes when we last met on the 3rd of March. You know, on page 4 of your agenda. Are there any matters of correctness or comment or accuracy that people would like to make at this point? Well, the meeting that I was at, which is always probably the key thing I do, they look like they would find me. No comments. Can I put the chair, please, that we accept these as a true and correct record? Go to Timber, please. Thank you. Tony, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. Thank you. Right, the assurance report. And I think we've got starting with the Parker, please. Thanks, Parker, appreciate that. This can I just lead in by saying actually there's a series of reports here which I think reflects my personal view is a substantial upgrade in the information that's coming to the committee. I would hope that actually committee members that generates for discussion. So there we go. Parker, thank you.
Okay, kia ora koutou. I guess I'll just start with the risk report. I think that's first on your list. I just need to clarify this. We've got 25 corporate risks, of which 17 are operational risks and 8 are strategic risks. Okay, so just being clear, I've got a bit of a number error there. So just last quarter, we've had no emerging risks come through. I've undertaken a deep dive into one. Obviously, you can see that through this report. I think in relation to all of the strategic risks, we have, I'm wanting to implement a RACI model where we have our leaders really accountable and responsible for the particular risks that we've got here. So this particular risk sits in the operational area. So I've done a lot of work with Bruce's team in collecting information around that. I've also done an update on the gathered information about what actions have been taken to manage the corporate risks and closed out to make sure that we are actually doing something about those risks in reducing the level of risk that there are. So I've received that information. And I think, listen, health and safety is still at the top of the list. And I'll just put that out there. When I came to this council, it was one of the risks that, and it's indicated as red, current risk, and it's still there. And there's a bit of work to be done on that risk, and I'll talk to that in the health and safety report. But why it's there really is because we've got a bit of work to do in that space. It's not to generate any concern at this point. We've got a really robust plan around managing that. So to let you know there, I think that's really it.
Thanks, Parker. Appreciate that. So three very good appendices here. One, the risks, which I think would be useful to take by the way that you can see as they go. The sense of, not sense actually, the operational risks. Risks that are generally for management to deal with, but are useful for us to have some visibility over and know those particular ones that are actually helping the executive leadership team and the risk owners within management. And then we'll deal with separately the deep dive that Paki's done some work on, which is pretty well known by us all. It's worthwhile recognising it plus some other big things. Front and centre for probably much of our thinking in terms of the future of local government that I intend to come in. So look, I'd like to questions then please, we perhaps start to check this. Anybody want to make any comments? We've got a read on there. Yes, Mark.
So I just have a question on page 13. Talks about deep dive in May 21 for the free water reform. But then it also has got audit November 2020 deep dive to be undertaken. Was that meant to be 2021 or?
Yes, you're
for the
probably.
contract management?
Deep dive. 21. No, that one's.
Was that done?
Audit.
There's a meeting in 2020. Audit due report.
Yeah.
Identified contract with the European Union that this is on Paku's work programme for a deep dive to ensure that we are now compliant.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think that's the implication of what that particular.
Okay, it's presumably same for the one underneath it then.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I do want to be, through the chair, I do want to be clear about this. The audits that are in here are actually an assurance piece around these particular risks. So they're not an audit of the risk, they're an audit of the controls that control the risk. So just so you're clear about that.
Can I just clarify that? We go to the full contract management report of November 2020. That's actually indicating that your team did assurance work over the controls in November 2020.
Correct. And we reported that report to you. That was the Zycus post-implementation report. So, yeah, and we had some recommendations out to the end of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any other? Sorry,
Yeah, no, I've just got a question around, so you're looking at health and safety outcomes for workers, and I'm just wondering, if their health and safety at work, and I would also include in that, I think you've got some headings about risk relationships and resources and monetary actions there. How do you deal with a situation where one of the employees is spoken to inappropriately by a counsellor and potentially maligned in written communications? How do you deal with that at an operational level and communicate that back to the governance arm?
Good question. Yeah, personal confrontation is one of our highest risks here, and our staff, it's a difficult one. In relation to immediate response, we always support our staff member. That's bottom line stuff. It's important to support them through EAP counselling, but also just as a debrief process. And secondly, I think it's important to raise that with whoever has sort of affected that person. Yeah.
So there is a reporting process for that, and
Yes.
where does that go? Because how are we going to be able to respond as councillors to ensuring that we all, each and every one of us, act responsibly in that regard? And I'm sure that most of us do, but it's in recognising who hasn't, so that they can be cautioned accordingly. Because I've raised it constantly that that is a potential fiscal risk as well for council.
Yes. Yeah, through the chair, I think escalating that sort of incident through the appropriate managers and up is the way to go. I mean, we receive the incident report. If someone's and then it's basically about escalating it to our senior leaders. Take up with whoever is affected. Yeah.
And we'll report back through the audit committee, through the risk reporting and the audit.
It will be reported through our incidents, but it depends on the nature of the incident. So yeah, I mean, you know, as you know, incidents can be like high level or low level sort of hazard. It just depends on the nature of it, to be honest.
I just want to express that concern.
Can I just, I mean, I think it's interesting because actually what you've outlined, I can use the colloquial within the family. The counsellor is essentially impugning or in some way putting that staff member under stress. This is family putting the family under stress. This is not an external person walking into a library.
Yeah.
And making it difficult. This is actually us doing it to ourselves. I would hate to raise it, but I will. That's code of conduct here.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have all signed up to a code of behaviour, basically, about how we will treat staff. I would always encourage in that situation that we take some time as council as a group of governors standard and actually just work out what is acceptable and what isn't. Let's say we are family. If a staff member's well-being is suffering because of councillor action, I come back to the point, it's family on family. And that shouldn't happen inside an organisation. It does, let's face it, at times and places, but it shouldn't happen.
Okay, so therefore councillors could decide whether or not they needed to have an updated workshop on code of conduct and what that actually means in terms of behavioural interaction with staff.
Yeah, I would encourage that, Sandra. I mean, I think it's not so much, I mean, the code, I think it's actually self-reflection over key matters that have actually occurred and why are they risky? You know, the behaviour and the well-being of the staff. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror, and it's the best way to deal with it. Best way, in my view, in a workshop situation, where you have that sort of discussion.
Just as an aside, I think it can go the other way too. There's potential for staff to make a comment, and someone's public comment, that actually impacts significantly on the elected people who have no bearing how it's made. So it's not a one-way conversation.
Look, I would agree.
So I could actually, if I wanted to, could highlight issues on both sides. So I can. So
No, that's all right.
I don't worry.
We have an appropriate process.
I understand it. For me, I'm just saying it's.
I would think, Tony, and I'm generalising here too quickly, but the predominant issue is council comment on staff. I'm not talking here about him criminal, I'm talking generally. And I think we have to treat, we as governments have to treat this seriously, because generally staff don't have the right to reply.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem. And hence the reporting mechanism that you've talked about taking become a job.
Yeah, I agree with Tony personally. I think 10 years now of council involvement, and I get to see it work with staff, protect accounts. I have never seen that, never ever witnessed that. I've seen heaps the other way. And I think it's beholden on the rest of us, if we actually see that behaviour, hold that person to account and not tolerate it. Because by saying nothing and tolerating it, we're actually encouraging the behaviour. So, hey, listen, definitely need to refresh the course by this council around governance and but yeah, I myself will not tolerate any sound of the big way. That's like mine to be on a regular basis. One-off may happen, but it's a pattern behaviour that I encourage code of conduct.
I don't want to encourage code of conduct complaints, by the way.
No, I don't either.
No.
I don't
I'm doing a couple at the moment. I think in the most unsatisfactory process we have, it's actually what does the code mean? What do we consider acceptable?
Yeah.
And I'd like to encourage Sandra, thank you for raising that. I think that's actually raised a good actually
I don't know if it's helpful or not in terms of clarity, but I wouldn't mind it if you could just elaborate slightly on the duty of care that we do have in relation to health and safety, because as an employer, elected members actually have a legislative duty of care.
Absolutely.
However, as contractors, which effectively what elected members are, there is a different duty of care in terms of their own health and safety, and it is not a duty that I have as a chief executive to look after elected members' health and safety. So it's not a two-way street in that regard. However, I would expect my staff to behave professionally, particularly in public dealings, because that is an absolute paramount. So in the way of the world, the way the world works, because legislation doesn't necessarily match pragmatism, I believe in the way we work, is we are a family, we are all one team, and we will maintain a duty of care that does go in both directions, because that's morally the correct thing to do, and that's how we want to function. But actually, in reality, legislatively, it's not the case. And I just wanted to check the pattern. Is that correct interpretation?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, that is correct interpretation. Having said that, as you talk about, duty of care, I mean, if anybody in relation to your own health and safety, if you have any concerns, I'm happy to provide you some advice around that. But you do have your own health and safety. You do have to manage that. But yes, in terms of staff, we've got a duty of care to staff in all facets of health and safety. Yeah, and in terms of personal confrontation, it's one of our biggest risks. It's one of our nasty nine. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're not correct at the risk. We've got a third parties paid this is dealing with health and safety.
Yeah.
Thank you for raising the fact that in the assessment that really what we should be their concern when it comes to three audits reform. The other ones to go higher there is climate change and contract management. Is there anything that you wanted to raise about those? I've only focused on those because they're orange. Climate change or contract management?
No.
Come back to the contract management stuff when we look at your insurance program.
That's right. Yeah. And through the chair, as I say, climate change is yet to be undertaken as a deep dive. So, yeah.
Okay. It's not. Management was Carl's report. Yes, we could probably put our governance maybe later, I suspect, and we'll start to change while we're looking at that. Is there anything that members would like to raise on page 14 about the occupational risks? I understand that something on the track, if I've got you correctly, there's going to be a risk workshop, and I think this is something in future Parker would be good for us to have a broader discussion and workshop on at some appropriate stage. So I'm comfortable that I've seen this here. Sam, sorry, you got a question?
Yeah, I do, just on this one you did ask, so.
Oh, yes,
I just note here in the operational risk around, it is a moderate risk. You've got the Public Records Act, non-compliance with the Act. around public records. So in light of what's been happening with PHP, it just sort of piqued my interest. Otherwise, I probably would have just skewed it. And I just wondered how we're placed in that regard. So like, I'm presuming that we do backups and stuff like that.
We do in relation, through the chair, we have a very good IT checks and balances in place. I know we have that tested regularly in relation to our walls between, you know, how people can get through. And so we've got a program around testing our systems and IT systems around that. So at this point in time, I'm reasonably comfortable around that.
What's the Public Records Act non-compliance?
Yeah, that's in terms of disbursement of information.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, you know.
I was pleased to see actually, I can vouch for your security in terms of your firewalls, etc. Because an email from Murray was blocked, which is excellent.
Working with resolve.
I don't think I've got one.
That's a family bank.
So thank you for that.
Can I ask a question for the one that's underneath Tauru Cemetery?
Poka round?
Yeah. What's that?
We hold it open, the document comes up under the public experience under legal risk.
No.
Public for Celestial, and we've followed right under, and we've got I'm not trying to again, if it does come up later, so let's deal with it.
And for some, it's a sensitive issue.
Can I just raise a question, please? Which is actually the first three, because it comes up again in our quarterly report, drinking water supply. Sorry, there's not in order, but I mean the first two. We're in the process of adopting our long-term plan. And there are probably implications around managing the risk associated with drinking water. I think I know the answer, but I want to ask publicly, my presumption is that long-term plan takes into account the nature of this risk, because it tends to be a structural response that's required.
Yes, so in respect to that, we have a project, you know, as you know, we've got a program of work in relation to our water treatment plants, etc. So yes, correct. Yeah.
We're comfortable that the capital program going forward will help us deal with this risk. Bear in mind, we won't get into to fund them until. Good. Are there any other questions folks would like to raise? Otherwise, I propose we move on to parties for some opening key comments for you around something that will be well in mind now. Still working for.
If I can make a comment, it's just about the audio. I can hear Paku really well, but the microphone seems to be very close to him, and I'm getting a lot of back feedback from the rest of the group and can't hear. I wonder if it was more centrally located, might help my hearing of the meeting. Sorry to interrupt.
Terry, Brucey, we're trying to fix that right now. I think the speaker is actually right in front of Parky, so it's important to hear it. But I would like to be able to hear the rest of the colleagues. We'll try that now. We've moved it.
I can't actually move it.
Yeah, no, you're clearer now, Bruce. Thank you. That's a lot better. Sorry, it was just bouncing back and echoing all the time. Sorry.
So we would advise Parky, please make certain you speak up now that we've moved it away. So that Terry can hear you, please.
So we're talking about the Three Waters report?
Yes, please.
Okay, so for the chair, yes, this deep dive, I have to break it down into several components, just to make sure that we're clear about, you know, each area of this risk. So the risk analysis actually kind of breaks down into the reform program, the change and what that might mean for the organisation, delivery change for our the consumers, and then also what's happening in our own asset space here. And of course, iwi Māori partnership is something also that is inside this particular risk, although we're not needing to actually deal with that right now. I think when I unpacked and got the information through in regards to this particular risk, what was really what was really clear to me is that that there's going to be an impact of change on this key stakeholders, our communities, and ourselves, actually, TCDC, and what that means to us. We don't have any answers right now. So what we're doing is it's just listen, feed into the process, and things will become clearer as we go along through this. And so I've rated each one of the components according to the not knowing, and afforded an overall risk of high. Yes, in relation to that. So if you've got any questions, or specific questions around the analysis, I'd welcome that.
I suspect in the middle of this, we all have a pretty strong gut reaction one way or the other around three-wood reform. And I'm not certain that's directly part of the risk assessment right at the moment, other than there will be another option as the decision needs to be made. Rob, I wonder if I could just start by asking you a question, please. This is a significant fall, I suspect, on the time of management in particular, although I suspect Sandra, elected members are now being called to lots of LGNZ type meetings over this. The risk that I think is really important for us is that we have a grip over strategic issues, and we are, as an organisation, able to engage in debate. It's a pretty broad question, Rob, but I wonder if there's any response to what I think is.
Oh, that's actually a massive question.
Yeah, that's a powerful one, probably.
Because I would take one step up from there to start with before answering the specific Three Waters reform question, and that is the future of local government question. I have far more anxiety on what the future of local government is, as opposed to the transition of one or three, depending on the view of an operation into a different governance and operational framework. And with regard to that higher concern, I have a far higher level of anxiety around the amount of government reform that is being proposed in a 3-year period. It's okay to juggle a few balls, because we can see circus acts juggle balls quite well, and they do a really good job of it. But when you are juggling cannonballs, which is what is happening in Wellington at the moment with health reform, RMA reform, with Three Waters reform, with transportation reform, you name it, everything is being reformed at the moment. And I think with that legislative complexity that is going to need to be dealt with appropriately, and bearing in mind the complexity that already exists within the local government legislative environment, if we don't layer the legislation correctly, New Zealand could implode on itself. And I have a huge level of anxiety as the chief executive of the TLA around that type of issue. So the engagement around the future of local government to me is far more important than the engagement over Three Waters reform. Looking more towards the Three Waters reform, again, I point to the legislative environment that we're heading towards. The legislative environment around Three Waters is massive. We are trying to deal with both an operational side, but a values and principles based side in both in the way we look holistically at water, and the complexity that is going to come out of that is massive. We can see that. Anybody who is educated can see how complex the legislative environment can be, particularly when we build in principles rather than facts and clarity. Legislation operates best with facts and clarity, not on principle. So we need to make sure that when legislation is produced for this Three Waters space, that it is based around absolute and utter clarity or else we are going to fall down big holes again. The lawyers will start to get very wealthy. So that is again my major anxiety around the Three Waters area, is how is the legislation going to pan out? Bearing in mind, we have only another 6 months before it's going to be released, and nobody has even seen the drafts of any legislation yet. So I feel for those people in Crown Law that are developing this stuff. I feel for the people in DIA who are feeling the pressure in terms of delivery to a program. But it's, as again, looking from a TLA perspective, we can influence that, not a jot, until we actually have something physically to look at. So therefore, we rely on our local government New Zealand and our Solgum dynamic to be able to have the right sort of input, which, if history has proven anything, it's not the best dynamic in terms of settling communities at the grassroots. So, you know, big cannonballs being juggled here. In terms of the operational side of Three Waters reform, from a Thames-Coromandel district perspective, we're in a far easier place than most local authorities because we don't have the weighted staff employed within our organisations to have those thoughts about how are we going to transition our staff. And from our perspective, it's going to be an assignment of a contract, which when we saw the amalgamation of Auckland, that happened quite simply, quite straightforwardly. So from an operational transition perspective, I believe we're in a better place than most local authorities. I'm not saying it's without challenge, because it's with significant challenge. However, it's far easier than most. So I think that's the various layers that I look at this whole process and have huge anxieties around. How are we staying engaged? Again, through the channels that I've mentioned, we're staying engaged. Our staff are being drawn into many different meetings. It's time consuming, but it's important that we do have that discussion. But ultimately, where I focus my staff on, and I think it's going to work well for most of New Zealand, is do what we do well and continue to do it and plan to continue to do it until somebody physically tells you to stop doing that. And as long as we continue on that basis, the holes that we will fall down will be fewer than they would if we were to become fully embroiled in the what might be scenario. That's the best advice I can give.
You're right. I think there is a lot of strengths in trying not to gain solutions that are going to the point about actually we do what is best for our communities and do it, so that makes sense.
I do believe in terms of the thought leadership, which is what we task our leaders with. There needs to be far more thought leadership in terms of what the future of local government is, not the Three Waters reform. Because the future of local government, if we get tied into some form of social or other type of dynamic in terms of what we're doing for the future, and our funding streams are limited, that comes with huge amounts of danger for the survival of local government into the future. But I won't sort of go into too much detail around that.
Well, thank you for that, because it actually I actually thought the future of local government and RMA reform were actually ultimate. Well, actually, I think the even agreement is the most critical question for us. My concern becomes, from a risk perspective, of have we as a governance group and obviously senior management had the chance to think through and be able to engage in these when it's appropriate, whether it's the regional stuff, whether it's the national scale, and also the subsequent concern about the time that this is taking us as an organisation relative to delivery of our services. The other comments people would like to make? Very helpful to have this. I think we're also recognising at the moment that actually it's an environment which is almost solely externally driven, outside of the fact our principle and our policy is let's get on and do the best job that we can as a council in this community for the assets while we have and plan for that in your LTP.
I think, I think there's a whole lot of hooey going on without a lot of substance, and basis of reform is actually questionable, because there are some areas that are performing and some aren't. Some councils have been honest about the need for funding infrastructure, some haven't, and based on saving their political answers. And so I've said that consistently. The concern I have is, you said you felt sorry for Crown Law. Well, I don't, because it's as though Crown Law is the one that's putting this ideology into our legislation. And our legislation is our law. That's what governs us and rules us. And the quality of that is, in my view, diminishing over time. And I think that they need to go back to the basic principles and the legislative guidelines, which they don't do. So if you're relying on Wellington to formulate good law, think again, because I think it's fast disappearing, that capability.
I think for me, sitting around the table, that we get very busy with things like long-term plans, etc. And there is little opportunity to discuss the higher level strategic issues of the day. And I think if we could have a work plan where there was a bit of space to get up out of the operational governance to that, what do we actually believe around the table, that would be a positive rather than a negative for me.
Regardless of which way this goes, okay, regardless of, this is a public asset, our infrastructure is a public asset owned by the people. That when the control of that asset moves to another entity, we need to make sure that in law, the protection is there for that public asset, or that the people of the district who have paid for that are reimbursed for that asset if it goes to another entity and becomes private property. So there needs to be a ring fence around the fact that this is public property, and any move to change that public property into private property must go back to and have some recompense back to the people who funded it.
And I don't disagree with that around 3 reforms. What I'm saying is that what about what local government's going to look like in the next 5 years?
And that's another thing.
And that's another thing, and that's what I think as you were saying.
Well, and the pressure there, of course, is that Jim Palmer's inquiry is still 2 years. They've got to make up their minds or make the recommendations as an independent inquiry for 2 years. So there's a lot of pressure in the system, which I think is Rob's point.
Everywhere.
The higher level.
But practically, this is not until we've seen a draft thing, right? When you're wasting energy, us pontificating around, you guys, we don't even know what's coming our way. We just press on and do what we're going to do, and when that stuff turns up, then we'll have a look at it.
Who we, the Gale Sturgeon and the pennies and those are the 2 people I don't know.
I don't want to disappear down a rabbit hole here because it's a massive conversation, but again, when we're talking about the future of local government, the key, form follows function, and to assess the form is you need the data. Sorry, the function, you really need the data.
Yeah.
But most of the data that Wellington makes decisions on is at far too high a level.
Yeah.
Than the granular level that local government would require to assess its own future. So through the chief executives regionally at the moment and using our Waikato LAS, we are trying to come up with a way of at least gathering all of the data that we currently know about to assess whether there is any granularity to it, to be able to advise both our mayoral forum and our individual councils as to where the future could lie if we had better data, or do we need to develop better data? Because for us to just chew the fat on what might be a good idea, which seems to be the flavour of the way we do our reforms here, it's, oh, that seems a good idea, so we'll do it over here, rather than what is the data that's driving this. We've moved away from that over the last 15 to 20 years. So we need to start forming up this data so that we can assess where the granularity exists or where the granularity is not there, and we need to delve deeper to be able to, as local authorities, recommend to Wellington that this issue of homelessness or social deprivation that you were talking about, the one size fits all will not work for these communities, and you need to know about it, because we'll end up with a new form of local government that is not the right form if we're not careful. And that's why I'm so anxious about it, because not even Wellington has the data, and it would not be able to gather that data without the help of local authorities in the next 2 years for that kind of a report to be produced.
Which is again goes back to my original risk concern. Are we in a position, are we resourced, do we have the time, the headspace going up from Billy's area down to be able to engage? And I think at the moment I would like to leave this as an open question, because as you say, Rob, we could get in a rabbit hole.
Right,
Well, you know, sometimes you do have to look into the chasm and recognise you have to deal with it. So, and to reflect that as part of our, and this is the point, perhaps a very big part of our risk. So, through is definitely, and I think we're actually recognising, we'll get almost a risk workshop in some sense here, Paku, that actually the future of local government is probably something that actually should be seen as an emergent in terms of the landscape for the council.
Yes, so through the chair, I am looking to have a risk workshop with you all probably July, around that time. So
speak up, please.
in July, we're looking to hold a risk workshop with councillors around the strategic risks, but also, you know, around this discussion. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So can I look at the resolutions, please, then on page 11? There are two. One is that we receive, and then there are we provide feedback at the start. I think unless somebody has a specific resolution, we just only need to pursue number one, which is we receive, because I think we've given thank you to the committee, good feedback, I would hope, Paku. So unless there's any specific resolution, let's not worry about that second bit there. So thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Martin. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Great. I sense your desire to move on, which is great. Thank you. Insurance report, Paku, you're still in the hot seat, man.
Yes, sure, no problem. So in relation to this, as you know, I'm reporting now on the review of recommendations out of audit. So I've done that in this report. We also undertook a post-implementation review of the project management tool Project Online. This supports our project managers to manage their projects, but really also so that our leadership team can get better reporting from that. And also we have undertaken some process development and improvement activity in some key process areas that we've identified as high risk. And we have a new resource on board, Stacey, who is on my left in the red, and she is undertaking a lot of this work, and there's been some real great wins in this area so far, which are reported in the back of this report. And so in relation to the Project Online tool, we've had 3 findings around user issues that need to be resolved. When we undertake a significant internal change or implementation, we need to make sure we've got great change management around that. And also in relation to ITIS systems, to make sure we have a really clear scope of what this particular system will provide our staff and to manage those expectations in relation to its adoption at TCDC. In the procedural development area, event management is one of our, and this is where things sort of start to go from one area to the other. This is one of our operational risks, actually. And so this is one of the areas that I was really keen to get across, because, you know, that's what Coromandel Thames is known for. And so we need to get at least that key process right. So we've already seen some areas for improvement. And one of the big ones for me is actually reducing the effort on our staff. To undertake this, we talk about, you know, caring for our staff and making sure in relation to their well-being. Other areas also around our improved customer experience. These are really important areas, and that's why we do what we do here. I think that's really it. If there's any questions in regards to this report.
Thank you, Paku. Appreciate that. This is really important. This is starting to show the benefit of the Paku's team. Rob and Stacey, it's great to have you doing your work as well. We're starting to get, as a committee, an understanding about what action management are doing to make certain systems and processes and internal risks are managed, or operational risks are managed well. Do we have questions for Paku? Yes, Martin.
So yeah, just around that operational risk, and we were talking about the DHB cyber attack before the meeting started. So do we have assurance that the backup and contingency systems for council are robust enough?
Yes, from my perspective, yes, from my perspective, we have received that assurance. What I would like to also say is that our ITIS manager has also recently had a overall review audit of her function, and there have been no significant findings out of that, and it's certainly in relation to the IT integrity, I guess is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Security, sorry. Yeah, and as I said, we have, as I mentioned previously, we have the checks and balances in relation to the testing that's undertaken on a regular basis.
Good. Any other questions for Paku? Just a couple for me, please, Paku. One is just in relationship to your post-implementation of your project online. My understanding will be new systems, new tools. It's a behavioural change. It's a cultural change in the way in which we operate. How is that latter aspect being picked up by staff?
Look, I think management is actually taking responsibility for this, and I know that when I undertook this particular audit, I sat down with that particular manager, our project manager, and another one in the operations team, and I talked them through this particular audit, and they were committed. I think it takes leadership to commit to making change, and they were committed to making the changes that were necessary in this particular audit. So it's driven by them, and it's their team. They affect their team. So they,
Yeah. So you're saying the leadership is part of the process. The final behind is with the rest of the room, but I won't ask the question because I'm curious what you can I just one other final question, please? On the process side, need management, excellent procurement, the risk is high. That's your current assessment of that, of where it's at the moment. So the process improvements that have been recognised, Stacey, need to be put in place, and that will lower the nature of the risk.
yes, it is absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So we've started identifying those improvements that need to be.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Right. Any other questions? Sorry, I shouldn't say right. That's my question. Any other questions for the other end? There being none, let's go to the recommendation. Again, it's to receive the report. We've reviewed the content and need to resolve it. Review the content, we'll provide feedback. You've got that promise. So the simple motion is that we receive the report. Thank you, Sally. Do I have a second? Thank you. Appreciate it, Robin. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Brilliant. Okay, mate. Health and safety.
So health and safety. In relation to this, in my work, just reviewing where we were at with health and safety, and when I spoke to you about it being critical, we, in relation to the assurance that we provide, one of the external assurance pieces that we would want is the Safe Plus review. Now this was due, and when I came into the organisation and saw what we had, and I'll be honest here, it was due to be had. And I said look, it's not worth having. We know what's wrong with and what we need to fix here. It's not worth getting them back in and having a look at what we've got now. And so I made a decision not to get them back in. No use paying for something that we don't need. We know where we're at. So that's why it's so high. I just need to let you know that. And what I've done is I've developed a 2-year plan. We've got a new health and safety business partner that is joining us from Sanford's next week, and he is going to drive that plan for us. And what we're going to do is start reporting on the improvements that we'll be making in relation to that plan. So that's why I say about it is one of our critical risks, but we've got plans in place to manage that. In relation to improvements, I had to review our top 5 risks, and I don't think those are quite there. I looked at them, and we now have a nasty 9 hazards list, and I call them nasty because they're the ones that will hurt our staff, all our contractors, in fact. So that's the list there. This is based on hard data, so incident reporting, things like that, but also just industry knowledge. So knowing what's, through our industry sources, where these hazards are occurring significantly, etc. In terms of relationships, we continue to build our relationships. They're everything to us in this space, and making sure that we're connected with, the likes of WorkSafe, that we keep ahead of the game there. Also, we want to build our relationships with our key PCBUs. As you know, under the Act, we're responsible for health and safety in relation to that. So I'm really keen to start building those relationships to make sure that their health and safety systems and processes are really robust. And I've started that conversation with Smart Environmental, which is one of our key, a lot of our hazards sit, and complex hazards sit inside their space. So
we are also PCBUs.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, it's an interesting area when you start to unpick what that means for council. In relation to hazard management.
Sorry, so just going to stop there, Tony. So the critical point there, Sandra, is we're a PCBU, Smart Environment are a PCBU, but just because they're our contractors, we get contracted out of our responsibility for health and safety. So if it's a smart environmental incident, we have to read it and be our incident. Makes it tough. Anyway, it makes it.
Individuals.
You got it, that's right. Sorry, Peggy. Sorry.
And so again, we've worked out that one of the areas that I've been sort of acutely aware of is our assurance in the space, and it sort of played out to a large degree in the RTS sites review of those and our monitoring of those sites. And so what I did was I've developed an assurance framework around our health and safety, testing, checking, and it's important that we have levels of assurance and not just rely on one level. So I've made it quite clear in a framework that I've developed where we are at with that. I think that's really it.
Thank you, Tony. So we've got, again, very insightful report, both around actually what our current set of hazards that should have been interested to us as officers. Obviously, incident report, appreciate that, and also actually this important point going back to the previous report that health and safety is red. In other words, we should be worried about, and I've taken the assurance framework, Paku, as the effective management response that has been established to improve the work around health and safety, along with obviously the fact that you've been able to employ a new health and safety officer. Do we have questions from members at this stage, please? There aren't any. Nasty 9, ignition sources, what are they?
So these are things like gas cylinders.
Yes.
Potentially at our RTS sites, for example, people drop off old motor mowers. And an example I'll give is that these motor mowers weren't being emptied, the gas that in, and in a Coromandel Thames summer that heats up, there's an ignition source right there. So we've identified that, and we've made sure that the RTS sites, those motor mowers, the petrol is decanted as part of that. So it's that sort of stuff. So it's not just, fires or things like that, although it could be. But it's what can cause an ignition to happen.
Still handling that.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. Just can we move to the table, please, National B, which is the dashboard. You've given us I think a summary of 7 months worth of results here for us to consider. I had one question, just for clarification, please, which was major incident number 3, where your description is the member of public was on private/company-owned amusement device, the photo slide, at a private event, and the device failed with serious injury. Can I just check, was this on council land?
Yes. Yes.
Right, that's the key point. Otherwise, I can't understand why it was necessarily our concern. I get that point. Look, it may be that at this stage, there may be questions that we don't have excluded around with the investigation, but at this stage, thank you for that. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Terry, Sandra quite rightly has prompted me to say, is there anything that you'd like to raise?
Thank you, Bruce, but no, I'm listening with interest and yeah, I think Paku's on to a good thing here with the health and safety and identifying those risks. So no, I'm listening and I can hear you all well, so thank you.
Great, thank you for that, and thank you, Sandra, for reminding me that.
I think you meant you're doing very well, Paku, rather than on a good thing.
Well, I think there's no more questions or last chance. Can I move to the recommendation, please? Again, very similar situation. I think it's the one we're dealing with here that we received the report. Had a chance to look at it, so we don't have a crack at two. I'll move to the chair that we received the report. Sally, thank you for seconding. The motion, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carry. Hey, Paku, thank you so far. You're on today. That's been really superb, and the discussion reflects the fact that good information gives rise to good questions. So appreciate your time. Can we move on to the non-financial information 23, please? Aye. Rachel, nice to have you here, Rachel. Nice to have you here to address. I think I'll leave it in your hands to give us a snapshot of the key points you want to make. Then I'll open it to questioning for councillors. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning committee, to members. So obviously Rachel worked on this report with the organisation and a large part of my team. So Rachel's done the hard work pulling all this stuff together with my team, putting all the pieces in that they need to do. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I'm pretty happy with the way that things are going in the quarter. There's one or two things I'll just point out, but basically happy to take any questions from Rachel and myself. The first thing I'd point out is we always jump straight to page 34 of the agenda, which is that little dashboard, very useful. Chief Exec and myself were having a conversation this morning about this in anticipation of the committee meeting. And one thing that stands out a little bit worthy of some commentary is about the 5th bar down, which is a full blue bar, which is the blue is not measured. And so that's around the water supply compliance with drinking water standards. We'll go away and do a bit more thinking about whether not measured is the right terminology for that one. And the reason I say that is that our drinking water quality from our treatment plants is being measured multiple times every minute as per the standards that we need to comply with. So there's thousands and thousands of data points that are being collected all the time that we send through to the District Health Board, the population health and the drinking water assessors. So they are being measured continually, but you cannot get compliance from the DHB until you've got a full 12 months worth of clear data. Now the standards are very high, and if you lose data for an hour in a year, you've basically got no compliance for 12 months. So the standards are very high, but we can't get a tick with achieve compliance at the Whitianga water treatment plant until after the end of 30th of June with the full 12 months of data. So that's why we've got to not measured, because with this quarter, we can't actually measure it, but we actually are measuring it on the ground. So that's why it's a bit of a confusing and misleading situation, and that, you know, we're reporting not measured, but yeah.
But also, the non-compliance relates to process. It doesn't actually relate to the water quality.
Well, there's two things. There's the process side of it, and this is where we're working away and picking up on the chair's question earlier on, to Parker, around drinking water in our capital program. So as you know, we're doing a drinking water standards improvement project across the district of around about 30 million, upgrading the water treatment plants. We've upgraded 3 of those already. And that will go as far as the technology. We can't do compliance until we've upgraded those plants. They don't pick it up on this point. They don't meet the standard to say they're compliant. So we've got to do those upgrades. So that's the first part of it. The second part is then you've got to operate it, taking those multiple data points every minute to show that you're operating it well and everything's working how it should do. You know, that the filters are working properly, the membranes are working properly, the dosing is working correctly, all those types of things. So that's the kind of actual operational side as opposed to the CapEx side. So we've got this. It's a bit of a matrix, really. Until you've upgraded your treatment plant, you've then got to start operating it. You've got to get a full 12 months of financial year, 12 months, so 5th of July, 30 June of clear data. And after that, you can say, tick, we've hit drinking water standards compliance. So this is the situation that.
From my understanding of it, we never will, because no matter what you do, if we have my understanding is that it's 15-second windows, is it?
Yep, so there's the
15-second windows.
Yeah.
If you miss one, you're non-compliant. That has absolutely no relationship with the actual quality of the water.
Yeah,
It's merely a technical process that if it's missing, then is translated as non-compliance with the drinking water standard, which is basically stupid.
So through the chair,
Stupidity in the extreme.
through the chair, I won't make any comments around it.
Okay,
But
I
would say is
out there.
it's not quite just a 15-second sample and you fail for the whole year, so it's a bit more than that. But your point is, I understand where you're going with it, Sandra. What I would say is that I really hope we do get compliance at Whitianga. I think we will do. Everything is in place. You know, it's not, you know, backup meters. You've got triple meters on everything to make sure if 1 meter goes out, you know, you need that backup meter, and if the second one goes out, you need the third one. So this is the kind of world we're in now of quality assurance and quality controls, that you do have 3 meters for everything to make sure that you don't fail for that 15 seconds, and that might switch out to 5 minutes. We can't have that. So I think we will be compliant with Whitianga. I'm quite positive. You know, I'm more positive, I suppose, in my belief of that. But your point is valid in that you only need a small slip up, and we've got humans involved in everything, and humans make mistakes. And so there's always a chance that you will lose compliance and you won't have that for a 12-month period. But we're definitely aiming for it. Whitianga is the first plant that we'll get compliance on, because that's the one we upgraded first. But yeah, so that's a long, drawn out discussion that I probably should have done shorter, just to explain to you about that blue bar. But anyway, we're going to go back and have another look and see whether not measured is the correct terminology, or whether we should be saying something about on track for achievement, you know, whether we should be going there. Now, if you go past the dashboard, and I could totally relate to why you might not go past the dashboard, because a lot of words in there that aren't that exciting. But if you do go past it, you'll see under the water supply, we have got a bit of commentary that more succinctly says what I've been rambling about for the last 4 minutes.
Thank you, Bruce. That is very helpful. Kerry, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, and I hear what you said, Bruce, and understand totally. The $30 million we've spent on this is exactly for that, compliance. So it's not about demand, it's not about capacity, it's compliance. So we have to do this properly. It's only to the 2008 standards. So it's not like it's for the 2021 standards. So yeah, we should continue it and have it so it is working as the best we can. I support this all the way.
Probably it's a follow-up question as well too, Bruce. And more than great with Andrew, but actually Rob just said we need to have data to drive forward. The right of it is we need data to prove compliance. Whether it needs to be 15 seconds or, you know, whatever the tolerance of data, that's another story.
Having said that, we won't know the compliance, Bruce, until year end. We must know though whether we have been able to provide continuously the required data, so we've had no breaks at this point.
Yeah, no, correct, yeah, so that was, through the chair, that was probably right. The key point I missed of my big rambling is that, yeah, we haven't had any issues, there's nothing going on. So if there's an issue during the year, obviously we deal with it. It's not like we wait to 12 months and then go, shivers in July, we had a failure and didn't deal with it. So we are dealing with anything that comes up as it comes up, but we can't have that full picture of compliance across a year, but it is correct.
It'll be ironic if we miss compliance because the DHB can't comply with its own computer challenges at the moment.
No comment.
It does reflect, I mean, it goes back to, and I do wonder whether, and we can discuss, this would be good for the rest of the discussion in July, we may want to get some form of greater assurance around cyber security. From my experience elsewhere, public utility systems are a great target for unspecified hackers. You should look at something like transport systems. It's amazing the number of people who have cracked those. And they're overseas operators, they're not people, they're overseas operators. Something like our data would be the odd reasons some don't go for it because of the credit and the money. So the cyber security thing is actually quite real.
Yeah.
We have to go back to just manual testing of the actual route.
But yeah, so through the chair, I think that's a good point. Cyber security is a critical thing and a critical issue. And I know Donna's team through the IT team, they do penetration testing. They get external experts in to do all that testing.
Try and do it.
Yeah, so I think we're doing what we need to do. Now, it's so unrealistic to believe that there's never any risk of anything happening because you get the cyber security guys doing the penetration testing and you get the hackers and they move slightly further ahead, and you manage to break into a DHB or something. And then you get the cyber security consultants will move up to that level. And so there's a constant, it's constantly evolving. So I think we're doing what we can do, my Donna's team, to make sure that we've got everything kind of nailed down, but never say never.
Thank you, Richard. Are there other questions folk would like to raise over the quarterly performance? Could I just raise a question, please? There's a fair bit here in your commentary around smart environmental contractors, particularly around rubbish and recycling. And I just noted the first two. So I get it. It's always going to be, I think, a difficulty in getting 100% pickup of rubbish. Perhaps what was disappointing, Bruce, and I'll have to correct you, but if we look at the statistics, is actually the result of the, if I pick this up correctly, the missed household rescue service requests responded to by the next day, which is at 67%. It seems to me that this is the safety valve if the original pickup doesn't work. It's like going back to your 3 metres. The redundancy in the system is that if somebody's been missed, we go back and fix it, but we aren't providing that service. So that seems to me really disappointing. Are you able to give me any commentary around that?
Yeah, so through the chair, it is disappointing, and that's disappointing for me as well. The challenge with any service that we're contracting out is to try and strike the right balance between having those levels of redundancy and getting a good contract price. So in things like, if we go back to the water supply, that's a public safety issue. So that discussion's that decision's a lot easier if we're talking about public safety. So you go to the 3 metres. The issue around solid waste is that it's very frustrating, and I'm not happy to see these numbers. I'm disappointed as well. But I suppose the decision is how much do we want to pay to bring it to build in a really high level of redundancy? Because the challenge often with these things is that we have collections over 3.5 to 4 days of the week. So on Monday we'll be collecting in Thames-Coromandel, Tuesday they're on to the next area like that, and then the later parts of the week they're working in Hauraki District and in Manawatu District Council areas. So the challenge is if they miss on the first day, to get back to the second day, they're already trying to work on the next day's collections. So obviously they do have, like a ute, one of the foremen will race out to get it, but if there's more than what you can take in a ute, it's hard to get a truck to go back because they're trying to collect the next day. So it does kind of flow on, and you'll get this domino across the week that you have to send a truck to pick up a whole missed street which then makes them late for the day they're supposed to be doing, and then they miss a street on that one because they're rushing around trying to get it done before.
But surely that's not our problem, that's the contractor's.
It's not our, no, it's not our problem.
The contractor.
It's not our problem, but what I would say is, looking back tonight,
This reflects on the contractor's performance.
it does, but there's no absolutes in these things, and it's not as simple as just to say, the contractor's failed, you know, you're not doing the contract duty, we are gonna, default a contract, you know, because then suddenly you've got to go through and get another contractor. So we have to work with the contractor and work in partnership with them. So it's not about giving them a free pass, but it's also about being realistic and knowing that if they've got other collections to do, there's going to be slip-ups. Now, we are working as hard as we can to manage them and influence them and control them and what they're doing, but there's always a situation where they're spread quite thin. They only need a couple of things to happen, a truck breakdown, closed roads, all that kind of stuff, and there'll be a challenge there that they can't meet. So again, it comes back to when we're re-tendering the contract, it's looking at what we put our emphasis on. You know, if we're really concerned about this, then we need to put more emphasis on the non-financial attributes rather than the financial attributes when we're assessing the tenders, because we need to understand where we're getting that balance point and what we're hitting as far as efficiency and cost saving versus a higher level of service. So yeah, it is a challenge. So I'm not saying it's a free pass and, you know, they're just doing what they do. We're definitely working hard to manage them. It is a challenging industry. They have real challenges. That's what we touched on before. They have challenges, as all solid waste contractors have, around making sure they get staff every day to work to do the jobs. You know, so it's challenges that we don't even have to worry about inside this building when we're working with our staff. Our staff challenges we have is totally, it's the whole next level when you go into some of those industries.
Oh, it's no problem. Can I just further that? So we shouldn't have challenges to this extent, but it will inform the next contract. Having said that, I am aware of one incident where it's a small cul-de-sac, I won't say where, and there's only about 5 people collected. But the problem is there's no turnaround area because all the houses park their cars, vehicles as a collection on, you know, around the cul-de-sac, so there's no turning. The truck can't get in. So, yeah, okay, but I'm just saying that's, so I've said, yeah, so I know that would be potentially a constant area of complaint, so that will add to your stats, because it's a very difficult and potentially there has to be a different solution come to for that particular expectation, I should say.
Yeah, correct. So through the chair, that's a good point, and we do have a number of cul-de-sacs and roads around the district like that, and we've pushed the contractor hard, and they've worked hard to come up with alternate solutions. So for some of those areas, they do go with a smaller collection vehicle, you know, so it's splitting the collection up and saying this collection is done by the standard refuse collection truck, and these little cul-de-sacs, they have to be collected with a ute or a smaller.
Well, I put the onus back on the inhabitants in that respect.
Yeah, well,
if you want collection,
yeah,
you guys have to put yourselves together and organise the ability for the truck reach to come and turn around and be able to leave again, otherwise you're going to get stuck with it.
Yep, and I love that personal responsibility that they need to take some responsibility of what they do. The challenge is you'll get one person on that street who says there's no broken yellow lines, I'll park where I want, and then you're back to the same thing. So it's never one answer or the other, but you're
right. Great anyway, what's the yellow line? Look back over.
It's about more on Stevens Street.
Can I say, oh, sorry, Tony missed another part.
No, I was just.
Oh, you were just. That was clear that it is. Tony.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think by and large, this contract works pretty well. If I think about the size of this peninsula and how many streets and how many bloody houses and how many alleyways and how many bags there are to be picked up, being mindful of weather and roads and other things. I think it's when you leave one bag doesn't get picked up, it's like someone having their throat cut, so I understand it. But I think by and large, we get a very, very good service. So if your bag doesn't get picked up, well, it probably wasn't the intent, we could sell and park in front of it and just sort out there in the first place. And they do come, sometimes I think they could do better, so I've been involved in it. When you ring up and someone says, no, they picked it up, and so no, they didn't, yes, they did. I've
I've got a record of it, so give me the record, and that's all I know, we haven't. So I would defend it, I think that you're wrong to say we missed it. And so my experience has been someone trying to justify their minor error rather than just being upfront and dealing with it that way. So that's, but I think they do a very good job given the complexity of picking rubbish up in Spinsham.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing I'll just touch on is I've put in there the number of properties that actually are paying a solid waste rate. That's 25,000. Now, if we look at, say, we're roughly 50% non-resident, so you could reasonably say 10 to 12,000 bags per week are going out and getting collected. Yeah. So that puts it in context. But for me, it's not good. We're still managing it, but you know, we've missed this number of properties. We're actually picking up on your point. We're collecting from, you know, in excess of 10,000 bags every week. So if we are missing more properties, if we are missing a few,
Spread over probably the most difficult geographic area in England.
But challenges again, not through past it, so we've got to manage performance, and it's frustrating. And if they make errors, they need to be dealt with in the right way to pick up on those points. So
I think it would be, if I could just make two final comments on this. One is I was thinking more about actually what are we offering the community? So 95% of the time we'll pick up the bag within a day, and you're indicating, and good concrete reasons, the price point to achieve that certainty is probably unpalatable. So what are we offering the community? It's not 85% certainty, but something less. Can we be open and transparent? So I'm thinking that we're developing a long-term plan, or we're going to adopt next month a long-term plan. Actually, what is the service we're offering? And then we have the right discussion. The price point is 67%, whatever the number is, as in contrast 85. I'm just looking for the honesty and the transparency in our performance, given you know what I'm hearing around here. But we've got a reasonable contract. Appreciate that the complexities, the difficulty. Let's just be upfront. You know, if your bag's missed and you meet your responsibility, which is Sandra's point, make certain it's obvious that there are risks that won't be picked up within the day because.
Yeah, I think we could do a better job of communication. I would just point out that we're probably collecting over 99% of the bags.
Yeah,
so those very less than 1%, which we've missed, we're only getting back to 67% of those ones within 1 day. Yeah, so it might be 2 days before they get back to it. So it's you know, we're missing a percentage of a very small percentage. So, yeah, but I think it might.
That's right. Can I just ask one comment on that? Because we're talking about a hatful of bags compared to how much are picked up. My tipping to me would be a far bigger blight on the district. Agreed. And we pass no comment whatsoever in terms of how we deal with blight tipping. It might be something to think about in the future about what is, from an outcome perspective, a far more important issue than 100 bags that take a day and a half to pick up.
Yeah, so flight tipping is an issue, and that's obviously, that comes under our roading activity, you know, as far as our roading contractors, those collections, you know, where things get tipped off the side of roads or on, you know, the end of group roads.
But again, the reason we put out focused targets in reports like this is to improve our communities, and I think rubbish and fly tipping is one of these blights. We need to raise that issue to the surface in some way. So I think, again, you know, it's nice to focus on the contractual stuff, but actually if we're talking about rubbish, fly tipping is a far more important issue to raise the transparency over so that the community does actually become aware of those types of issues and the cost to deal with it.
Do you actually want a budget line to deal with fly tipping?
So we have a line for dealing with fly tipping under the roading activity. So it's part of their contract that they manage that. Now that's fairly small, and we don't have a lot of issues, but there are issues. And you know, to pick up on the chief exec's point, you know, that is where it impacts on our community and on our visitors and our environment. You know, everyone comes here because of the beautiful environment, and if you're driving along and then you see a couch in a fridge and 6 bags lying on the side of the road, that's not good. You know, so I think Rob's point's a good one. You know, that this is why we have targets, so you focus in on performance, you know. So if we don't have any targets around it, it makes it hard to focus it. We do have targets around it within the contract that they have to collect it within a certain time frame once it's been identified, but we're not bringing it up to the surface as far as numbers and so that the elected members and the public can actually see what we're talking about, what volume we're looking at. So I think it's a good point.
So again, this sort of goes back to we're about to adopt enough that what do we actually focus on? I mean, the argument would be we should have something like looking at nothing on the 24-hour pickup afterwards. All I'm trying to do here is just make something we focus on.
Yes.
I'll take a point. And look, my reading, something you started with this opening phrase was actually you're reasonably comfortable overall with Preston. It seems to me from reading of that, which is where it's here. Are there any final questions for Bruce or Rachel? Rachel, we have a Bruce, but that's what we had Bruce up for. Maybe that we might want to make some comment. Last chance for any comments around. Rachel, you've got nothing to add?
No, my only comment was that the rubbish was much higher than expected due to increased people visiting the peninsula. So.
Oh yes, the COVID impact. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah.
Volumes did increase substantially, Rachel. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, can we move to the resolution, please, to receive the report? Do I have somebody to move that, please?
Yep.
Thank you, Sandra. Do I have a seconder?
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Tony. I'll put the motion, please, that we receive. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Bruce. Righty, if we can move on with the debtors, please. And the Treasury report between us and Smokers, by the way, guys. You haven't seen it. You come back and say chair. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Welcome on, me. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'll take the report as read. The debtors report. Probably the main thing just to highlight is the local government rating of the Northern Maori Amendment Act that's recently came in. It's going to have a big effect on our Maori freehold debtors, which we're doing an assessment at the moment to assess how they, can they be reasonably covered, and a good majority of those can't be, so they will fall into the write-off category. Land for deceased landowners, we have a few of them, and we're also looking at making our Maori freehold unused land non-rateable, so getting that all ready for the 30th of June.
Yeah, so because what the equity effect what applies from 1 July is cheap.
Yeah, it was to be written off by the 30th of June, so yeah, the write-off powers are in effect actually as of the 12th of April. So,
okay. Right. Yeah. Questions?
I suppose just with writing that off as well, we've already provided for it. So, yeah, the impact kind of doesn't hit the P&L.
It's about keeping it is tidy and not extending key area, which otherwise has a substantial balance behind it.
Yeah.
Yes, Senator.
Just one question. With the changes to the Whenua Māori Amendment Act, local government rating of the Whenua Māori Amendment Act, I can't see how the changes are anything different from what we are currently doing. It's just right off.
It gives us
I think we had about 10 years to do
It's
it.
changed from this committee would write them up.
Yeah.
I must now write
Yeah,
it
it's
to
not
the chief executive, so it doesn't even come to a committee.
I think
That's all.
Yeah.
yeah. And I think the word must is actually.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Sorry, if I can come in there, I missed that, Sandra. What was the question again? What did you say?
So my question was that the changes of local government rating Whenua Māori Amendment Act, the changes to that piece of legislation changes the decision by the council to wipe arrears on Māori land to the chief executive wiping arrears on Māori land. So there's no change in the operational side of it. It's just that it's a CEO decision rather than a council decision, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah. For clarity, it's not even a decision.
Yeah. Yeah, so just we're still working through it, but at a high level, it's going to be about 1.8 million. We just got to do an assessment as to whether our 1877 land falls into that category.
Okay, thank you for that, Hayden. For that, and obviously, you've highlighted the key point, which I suspect most is focused on, is this is to be implemented. As you've helped me, it's a must, and there's a bit of work to do, which you're doing at the moment. Is any other questions members like to raise about this as well? There being none, can we then please move to the resolution, which is that we receive a move of that, please. Thank you, Murray. Do I have a second? Thank you, Tony. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Hayden, are you helping us with the or is that Donna?
That's me.
That's you, Hayden. Very
update. So I'll take the report as read. Just the attachment. This is something we're working on with PwC to provide the audit risk a report each month on our treasury is performing. But yeah, if there are any questions.
Right, this is really an important part. Certainly what LTFA, our primary funder, look for us as a risk committee to be focused on, which is actually the treasury function. So we agree a budget of what money to raise, by way of revenue, what to spend, but we also have the funding side. And increasingly, as I understand it from our financial strategy, debt is going to play a big part. So if you go to the first page, which is I think page 88, I'm reading my glasses. Page 88, you'll see there what is the proposed track for our debt over the next 10 years, which is going from 69 to 135. I understand scenario 2 is actually based around our performance traditionally.
Yeah, correct. It's in line with where we roughly.
In other words, the generally we'd expect around equitable delivery, because that's the primary driver for the net going up, right? You know, so things like the $30 million program for operating water.
Yeah.
And I take it the third line with the steep drop going to 44 million is what we would anticipate the situation to be if the debt associated with the rewards assets is to go.
Yes.
Bearing in mind your revenue goes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of the covenant, revenue is a determinant about how much we can pay. So that's the first thing. Second thing then I want to draw on is, if I can find the right one, the critical thing is the committee need to recognise, and it's further down in Hayden's report, we use a number of instruments to raise that debt. Essentially, they're raised on a floating basis. In other words, it's subject to movement in the interest rate. And we protect ourselves generally by having a sense of fixing that rate, ordinary interest rate swap. And if you look at page, I'm looking here at page 19, you'll see a graph on the left-hand side with a lot of squiggles, the rate risk timeline. So we're saying that actually you don't want to necessarily have a fixed position in its entirety, but actually there are bands that make sense to have yourself fixed in. And if you look at it, that shaded sort of sounding pink colour, sorry if I offend anybody's design, whatever colour it is, you will see that jagged red line is the lower limit of what we say we would have fixed. And there's obviously some white space under it steers that actually at the moment, the way we project, we are below our policy settings. That says we need to arguably arrange some form of forward swap for that period, which is about 2024. Yeah. Okay. So if we want to comply with the policies that we have set and to give us the level of interest rate certainty, we need to do that. That's really the value of this here. The other thing that I can note from this, just for everybody's benefit, is if you click on right through, there's an interesting page here called on page 99, which is actually our cost of funds. Okay, and you can see that in the current environment for the next couple of years, that cost of funds is around about, where I'm at here, I think it's at 3.48%. But to have that money, we're at 3.48%. If you go to the bottom right-hand diagram, you'll see how that is built up. It's not directly the interest that we pay on the actual debt instrument, it's that. But as you'll see there, the greatest component is what it costs to fix your interest rate. So it's 2.48% of that relates to fixing. Yeah. Okay, so it's just a build up of the total cost of fund. We're going to have the debt on board. By the time we take into account swaps, margins, fixed rate bonds, unhedged floating, commitment fees and bank margins, it comes to 3.48% costing us. Yes. Radio. So that's another thing that I just really want to go to you. That is probably, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Our, at the last level of risk, we came back with the blend and extends, and that's had an effect on sort of that rate. We've needed to, push it up and get far lower. What you can see, I think, is a lift there's a list of our swaps on page 102.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you're saying that we should be extending our you should be hedging going forward because interest rates are tipped to go up.
I'm not hedging to the minimum.
So we should be fixing.
Yes,
you go to 3 years or 5 years is what most people will be doing today. And 2024 is probably the date, although people are talking 22, but late 22. So, I mean, you'd be fixing for 2 and 5 years. Yeah. And floating the rest. And nothing's going to happen probably until 2024.
So that's again surprise for us. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Martin.
No, I'm just going to point out.
Terry, thank you for pointing out to me. Sorry, Terry, did you have a question?
It's muted.
No, sorry. No, I didn't have a question. I'm listening. No, sorry. I'd take my hand off Martin. Sorry.
So again, there is a paper that follows, and again, it's just coming up on page 8. So I think it's hopefully again answers the question, thanks, Sandra, and reinforces Tony's point. That diagram to the right, or even followed in blue, reflects on that page there. Yeah. 108, that reflects actually where at the current point, in the settings we have, in other words, the instruments we have in place to fix our debt, we are going below what we see to be a safe position to be in. So the answer is yes, we need to increase the level of hedging. Okay, and the advice from PwC, it doesn't put us in a exposed position. When I first came on board, he fixed a lot. We didn't take the debt, but we had fixed positions we had to pay money for. Is that correct? I think I got that right. Yeah. Because we didn't deliver our capital program, generation back, it actually meant that we had all these instruments we didn't need. Yeah. But we had to pay for them. So you have to be careful that you are, in the way that Tony's saying, prudent about actually the amount of fixed.
Yeah, and we hedged it probably at the time they were bad rates, but obviously with the way rates have
So this is all about our settings to enable us to deliver. If we didn't make use of debt, we wouldn't be delivering what the community expects and what we want to drive for them. So we have to play this game, if I can call it a game, but we have to be wise about understanding it. So it's partly protected us by having an external advisor in the form of PwC, but we as a committee
still have to have a sense about what those settings are. Radio. So Hayden, I think, any questions people would like to raise on that?
So that's the plan you're going to.
Yeah, we are going to carry out PwC's recommendation, which is 1.6%, which is a pretty good hedge.
So then, in taking out that instrument, that will bring us up to the minimum.
Make us
And keep us in time and reach that balance for us. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Bearing in mind that as we go forward as a committee, it's subject to whether or lose the freeware agent and hence the debt. The level of debt under the completion strategy is going to ramp up quite considerably. And so the quality of monitoring of us over this.
No, that is something that we need to make sure is included in the equation of any transfer of asset. Not ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've got to, that's.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Yeah, go for it. No, it's no.
So, there's this meeting, we've got a strategy to meet at the policy meetings. Who, when and how do we test the policy settings to make sure that they are right for our organisation?
So I'm going to ask you the question, please.
We have a treasury management policy that is also reviewed and recommended to us by PwC, which
That's been through this.
Remember we adopted that, I think it was December or somewhere towards the end of last year. And that's the time we look at policy, we look at the past, we look at the future, and we try and align the policy, to where we're going.
It's all the prerequisites for the PLTP.
Yeah, so we've done that, I was just getting that clear in my mind, yeah.
I would recommend it right now, but I think somewhere in the future studies that we could get PwC online. I mean, they're very helpful, as continue to do, being very helpful in walking us through the safeguards that we get in place around our treasury management approach so that we can, I would hope, for all of us understand where we're at with these things.
Cool.
Okay.
Well done, I'm happy to move the resolution.
Thank you, and I'm happy to second it. So can I put, simply we have to receive the report. Thank you, Hayden. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carry. Thank you very much. No, you move it on. I'm following the boss. Okay, thank you very much. Now it's time for a couple of things. 5 to 7 minutes late. Could we reconvene just after 10 to